Okay, so welcome back to our Friday here. The two changes I just want to announce before we start the new semester. One is that I think what I want to do is I want to make the default topic of this year, or not topic, the default theme of this year, Pirkei Avos. And there's a lot in Pirkei Avos, but I did not realize that, I had taught Pirkei Avos for many consecutive years up through last year. And then the first half of this year, I wasn't doing it. And like, I miss it, and there's so many good ideas and we all want to perfect ourselves. So like, what better text? And so I'll still use this for like, other things that I'm exploring, but I think I want to default to Pirkei Avos. So that's announcement number one. Announcement number two is I'm doing some tweaking in terms of my own time management stuff. So I used to make full PowerPoints for this Friday here because I did that for Lomdeha, and I just don't have the time anymore. So we're gonna like wing it. Like this time, I didn't even prepare the translations ahead of time. So we'll translate as we go, and we'll use Word document. And then the third announcement is about today's year. Okay, so today's year is called, I titled it Rabbi Akiva's View of Human Existence. And that sounds like a very grand title, but I feel like by the time we're done with today, you'll be like, yeah, that's pretty much what this is about. Okay. Today is going to be, so this is something I found with my chavrusa that like blasted open our view of what you should be doing with your life in the grand scheme of existence. And we spent like several weeks on it when we were preparing it. But so there's a lot here. I kind of envision today being like a setup day, like setting up the area and the questions and then going through the Rambam. We're going to be focusing on the Rambam's commentary on this mishnah, a very short mishnah, very jam-packed mishnah. And I don't think we're going to get into the analysis until next time, but you'll see there's so much just in the facts that it's going to be like a real adventure. Okay. So let's go. Okay, so you'll see here I have, oops, sorry, this is wrong citation. So in Pirkei Avos, by the way, then the numbering system is different depending on which of the Mefarshim you're using. So this is either Pirkei Avos 3:15 or 3:18. Okay, and you'll notice that there are two versions of the Mishnah. There's the regular version, and then there's the Rambam's version. Okay, so let's start with the regular version, and the Rambam's is just has something added. Okay, Hakol Tzafui v'harashus nesuna uvatov ha'olam nidon v'hakol lefi rov hamaseh. Okay, I'm going to translate this because this is a hard one to translate. Okay, so hakol tzafui, everything is watched. Okay, or I think if I haven't looked at our scroll, but I feel like our scroll would translate it as foreseen. Okay, the word safui, if you look at the sorry, hold on. If you look at the Alator dictionary, safa is to look out or about to spy or to keep watch. So everything is like watched, foreseen, looked at. Okay, v'harashus nesuna, and free will is given. Uvatov ha'olam nidon, and the world is judged in goodness or with goodness. Let's just say this. Okay, v'hakol lefi rov hamaseh, and everything is according to the. Now here's a not trick question. How do you translate rov?
Many or multitude.
Okay, good. Many or multitude. That's the correct answer. Okay. The answer that I mean, not that there's only one correct answer. The answer I was expecting people to say is majority. Okay, and the reason why why Navas is more correct is I believe in biblical Hebrew, it means multitude, abundance, and greatness. Like for example, in Devarim 1:10, Hashem Elokechem hirba eschem, Hashem your God has multiplied you. V'hinechem hayom, and today you are kechochve hashemaim larov. You are like the stars of the heaven in abundance, not in majority. Right. So, but in rabbinic Hebrew, it often means majority. Yeah, bro.
Also, the word rov is in harbe.
Yes, same shorish as harbe, right? So, and everything is according to the multitude of action. Okay. Now, what does the Rambam do? So Rambam is exactly the same for the first part. Okay, hakol tzafui v'harshus nesuna uvatov ha'olam nidon v'hakol lefi rov hamaseh aval lo al pi hamaseh, but not in accordance with the action, which just throws a whole wrench into the thing. Okay. Now, this is very, very, very cryptic. Okay. Like what is it even, talking about? So we're going to ask questions in a second, but let me tell you why I was drawn to this mishnah before I knew what the ideas were. So if someone asks you what is Pirkei Avos about, and there's no one right answer to this, but what is your impression about what Pirkei Avos is about, or the purpose of Pirkei Avos? And it's possible we've talked about this. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say just kind of like general like advice, I guess, on how to live life in like a good and ethical way.
Yeah, correct.
It's like little snippets of like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like a fortune cookie kind of reminds me of.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like it's little statements about how to live life in an ethical way. I think that's a good statement. Anyone else have a different take on it?
I mean, kind of similar to that, but
yeah,
more just like advice that you get from a parent over the course of your childhood, but just like collected into one thing.
Right. So truthfully, I mean, it is like that because the format of Pirkei Avos is different Tanaim and what their sayings were, what they would say. And, as we know from halacha, that your Rebbe is like your parent, and if these are the saying, these are the Rebbeim of Klal Yisrael, this is what they were teaching, this is the advice they were giving, right? If you want a more nuanced answer, which I don't know if it's unanimously agreed upon, but the answer, like my kind of go-to answer, is the Gemara's answer, which is Haiman debai lemihavi chasida l'kaimi le'avos. That if a person wants to become a chassid, meaning to go beyond the letter of the law, to become like greater than a tzaddik, then he should fulfill the advice of Pirkei Avos. But even that has to do with being a chassid, which has to do with chesed, like being adam l'chavero. Okay, so what's in light of all of your descriptions, what's weird about this mishnah?
It feels like there's not necessarily, I don't want to say like a point, but I feel like typically the Sukkim will give you more direction and have like a general like an advice aspect to it, whereas this seems more broad. And it's
definitely more broad, and you're right. It's not pointed in terms of what it's telling you to do, right? So that's a good way to say it. Let me ask you a question from a different angle, which is that like the subject. Okay, let's just do an example here. Okay, we're just going to randomly pick another mishnah in Pirkei Avos that's familiar. Let's say what are some more familiar ones? Actually, I have no idea what's familiar, what's not familiar. But okay, here's one that's familiar. Im ina nili mili, right? If I'm not for myself, who will be for me, right? What parak is this in? Im ein ani, I think it is. Yeah. Hillel's statement, right? Im ina nili mili. If I'm not for myself, mili, who will be for me? Ukshani la'atzmi, if I am for myself, mani, what am I? Im lo achshav, and if not now, Amosai, when? Okay, so what's this? What would you say the subject matter of that statement is? It's a statement in ethics, okay, like how to live, right? Next one, Shamai Omer, Asay Torascha Keva, make your Torah permanent. Emor ma'ad v'asay harbe, say little but do a lot. And greet every person with a cheerful face. Okay, so that's another thing in ethics in terms of how to live. Okay, Rambam Gamliel haya omer asay lecha rav, make a rav for yourself. V'histalig min hasafek, and get out of doubt. Val tarbe la'aser omados. Okay, and that's a weird one. Don't be increase in tithing based on estimates. Okay, one more. Shimon beno omer kol yamai gedalti bein hachachamim. All my days I was raised among the chachamim. V'lo matzati leguf tov ela shtika. And I found nothing better for the body than silence. So that's advising you to also to minimize your speech. Study, expounding is not the main thing, but rather action. The more you talk, the more hate you bring. What is this a subject? What's the subject of this? Ethics. So now you look at our mishnah. Everything is foreseen and free will is given, and the world is judged with goodness. And everything is according to the multitude of actions, but not in accordance with the action. What would you say the subject matter or the classification of this statement is? So like Nava was saying, it's not ethics, right? Because it's not telling you what to do. How would you classify this? Like, what is it? What type of, in the library, like where would you find this statement?
I was thinking free will or judgment, like how God views us.
So this is either going to be, I'll attach terms to the two. Either this is a subject about free will, which is really about like metaphysics, right? Like, about how to reconcile human free will with God's knowledge, right? I mean, that's a classic philosophical metaphysical question, right? If God knows everything that's going to happen, how can we have free will? Okay. And this is about how God judges the world, which is another branch of metaphysics. It's about hashgacha. So what caught my eye about this is this mishnah doesn't seem to have anything to do with ethics and doesn't seem to fit into Pirkei Avos. Okay, so that, in fact, let's list that as our first question before we list the other ones. Ooh, this is not the right font. Hold on just 1 second here. Libri 12. Okay. What is this doing in Pirkei Avos? Pirkei Avos is about ethics, but this is about metaphysics, i.e. the contradiction between God's omniscience and man's free will, how God judges the world, etc. Okay, so the question is, what ethical directive is this giving us? I'm incorporating Nava's question into this, giving us. Yeah, okay, that's question number one. All right, so what are the other questions you have here?
I mean, I guess from like a semantic perspective, I'm wondering what multitude of action is referring to, and what does that actually mean?
Okay, so what does the phrase rov ha-ma'aseh mean? Yeah, okay, good. Like how multitudinous is multitude, right? Like how much,
I mean, I just have like a lot of questions about this whole thing. Like, everything is watched, foreseen / looked at. Firstly, what's everything? Secondly, is it watched or foreseen or looked at? And thirdly, looked at by whom?
Okay, so I'm gonna make these in order. Okay, so what is included in hakol? Okay, what everything, right? What does it mean by safui? Okay, watched. By now, the only reason I'm not going to say by whom is I think that everyone's unanimous, which is that this is talking about God. Okay, that everything is seen. Yeah.
Well, my question is more like, in general, it's talking about God, but I think it could also just mean by humans as well.
Well, like, the reason why
does the first statement need to be limited to God?
So I think the reason why everyone says this is about God is because who is the one who could be described as watching and who's giving free will and who's judging the world? That's only God. And it'd be a stretch to say that they're all talking about different things, So I think that's why, yeah.
But it's doable, I think. Like everything is watched or like looked at by other people, and other people are judging your behavior. And you could argue that the free will thing is like other people's, like God has granted you free will, but free will is given so that you can react to other people. As in, like, I think it could be mainly talking about God, but there could be an argument that it could also apply to people.
It could be about other people, but in terms of the, you can't even call it the subject, he's not identified here, but in terms of the, like, well, I guess, yeah, the subject of this, in terms of like subject object, is God is the one who is this is watched by. God is the one who free will is given by, and God is the one who the world is judged by. And even if you want to say the other stuff about like how people interact, like the subject is God. So that's why I'm as far as I know, that's unanimous. So I'm not going to treat that as a question in terms of our list. But the other two questions are definitely worth looking at. I mean, I think we should add the classic question. I mean, we're gonna have to get into the subject, okay? And I don't intend to spend the entire month on the subject, but how can man? I mean, we'll just ask it. It's good to review anyway. How can man have? Sorry, if everything is foreseen, how can man have free will? Classic question. Okay. I'll give you an opportunity to answer that later on when we start doing answers. Okay, what else?
What does it mean by action?
Yeah. Okay, good. So let's add that over here. What does ma'aseh mean in this context? Like, does it mean like any action, mitzvah actions, like something else? Yeah.
Also, what does it mean, but not in accordance with the action?
Yes. Okay. That is the major question on the Rambam, which is what does it mean by but not in accordance with the action? Okay. And how is this a qualification of the previous statement, right? Is judge according to the abundance of the action, but not based on the action? Like, what's the action? Like, let's add that here. What is the action that the world is not judged based on? Yeah. I think there's only one clause that we haven't asked about yet, which is uvatov ha'olam nidon. The world is judged in goodness. What would you ask about that? I mean, other than what does it mean?
I don't know if this is like the question, but to me that comes off as like in judging, there's like a goodness lens put over it instead of like an accurate lens.
Oh, okay. So that I think is the question. I'm gonna phrase it in a way that allows for broader analysis. Where are we here? Hold on. Everything's so yeah. What does it mean? First, I'm gonna say, what does it mean by the world is judged in / with goodness? So the main question is, as opposed to what? Okay, meaning like I'll put what you said in here. As opposed to being judged accurately, as opposed to being judged with badness, right? Like if I just go up to you and say, hey, God judges the world with goodness, you'd be like, as opposed to what? So that's our question here. Okay, now, yeah, Brooke.
What does it mean judged?
Yes, okay, that's another good question.
Is that an action or just a thought?
Yeah, that's another good question. So, what does it mean by judged? Okay, and I'll say here, when, what is the nature of this judgment? Okay, is this, like after death, or like on Rosh Hashanah, or at every moment, or in his design of the world, universe, right? Like judgment in what framework? Yeah.
Yeah, to add on to that also, it might be like the same question, but I guess rephrased, but like, how often is this done and in what context?
Yeah, let's add, what is the nature of this judgment and in what context does this take place? Okay, so those are our questions here. Okay, now, ordinarily, like we did last time we did Pirkei Avos, then we would try to answer on our own, but we have so much to do here that and I want to at least finish reading the Rambam this time and setting it up. Okay, so let's dive right into the Rambam. Okay, and I'm going to translate this as we go. Okay, so he says like this: Bavazo. This Bava is literally like I think like a collection. Okay, this collection of statements, koleles inyanim gedolim meod. encompasses many great ideas, okay, or fundamental ideas. Ideas only worthy of someone like Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention this is Rabbi Akiva. I mean, it's in the title, but this is a part of a series of Rabbi Akiva statements. Okay. So we all know Rabbi Akiva has this reputation for being like one of the greats, right? So he's saying like this statement is a Rabbi Akiva level statement. V'zeh pirusha b'kitzur, and this is its explanation in a concise form. Ub'tanai, on the condition shekvar havinosa, that you already understand ma shekadim b'prakim hakodim, what came before in the prefatory chapters. Now, this is a Jewish literature question. Okay, what is the Rambam referring to when he says the prefatory chapters that he expects us to already have read? And I'll tell you what the answer is not. The answer is not the previous chapters of Pirkei Avos.
Well, Pirkei Avos is in the middle of Sanhedrin, so maybe like the Perakim and Gemara that came before.
Okay, so that's a good guess. Pirkei Avos, just to correct one thing. Pirkei Avos is in Nezikin, which is a different than Sanhedrin. Yeah, I think that's what he meant. Yeah, so that's a good guess. Okay, but that's not what the Rambam means. I'll give you a hint. The Rambam is referring to another one of his works. So the answer is Shemoneh Perakim. Okay, the 8 chapters. Why is this not loading? Give me 1 second here. Let's just try opening it again. Hold on. Rambam. Yeah. So what is Shemoneh Perakim? So Rambam wrote, the first work that the Rambam ever wrote was the Pirish mishnayos, or the first one that like his major works was the Pirish mishnayos, commentary on all the Mishnah. So what we're going to be reading is his commentary in the Pirish mishnayos on Pirkei Avos. But the Rambam wrote an introduction to Pirkei Avos in the commentary on the Mishnah which goes by the name of the Shemoneh Perakim, the 8 chapters. Okay, and it is on, as this title says, a classic work on the fundamentals of Jewish ethics and character development. So the Rambam basically says that rather than like filling in all the premises in my commentary, I'm going to give you an overview of what the soul is and what human beings are and how you develop your character. And that's called the Shemoneh Perakim. And that's in his commentary on Pirkei Avos. And the reason why I want to show you this thing is, in my opinion, this is the best edition of Pirkei Avos to get if you ever want to get one. It is the Yaakov Feldman translation. It uses the best Hebrew edition, and it has English. Like, my neuroses is that I always have to translate everything if I use it as a source sheet. I don't like relying on other people's translations. I would rely on this guy's translations. It meets like my own standards, and it has excellent footnotes and excellent endnotes. Okay, so this is going to be a little difficult here because we're obviously not going to read all of the Shemoneh Perakim in order to do this here. But what I want to do is I want to read the Rambam's commentary on our Mishnah, and then read excerpts of his commentary of the Shemoneh Perakim to get the full picture here. Okay, but just know that the Rambam is saying that he expects you to already have read the Shemoneh Perakim before we get to this point. Okay, so he says like this: Amar, he said, Shekol Mashal Ba'olam, that everything in the world, okay, Yadua Lefanav Yisale, is known before him, exalted is he, V'hu Tzofehu, and he looks upon it. V'zehu Amro Hakol Tapui. This is what it means by everything is seen. Okay, so answering Brooks' original question of who is seeing things, it's God. Okay, and the Rambam does not elaborate on that. Okay, but then he says, he gets to his point of the Achrakach, and afterwards, Amar, he said, Al Tachshov, do not think, Shebioso Yisale, that since God, exalted is he, Yodea Hamasim, knows the actions, Yischayev HaHechreach, that this necessitates compulsion, V'shiyihad Mukhrach Al Eze Masim Minasim, and that man is compelled to do any of his actions. Ein hadavar kain. This is not so. Ella, rather, kol adam, every person, b'chirai b'masav, is free in his actions. Okay, v'hu amro. This is what was meant by his statement, Harshus Nusuna, free will is given. Klomar, meaning to say, Rishus L'chol Adam Nusuna Lo. Every person's free will is given to him, as we explained in the 8th chapter. Now that is the thing that we are going to read, okay? Because that's the Rambam's first major treatise on free will. We're not going to read the whole thing, but we need to understand, have a basic idea of free will before we go on. Okay, but let's go on here. Amar, he said, Umishpat Hashem libnei Adam hu b'chesed lo b'dikduk. Okay, so exactly like Nava said, okay, that Hashem's judgment of mankind is with kindness, not with precision. Okay, so God does not judge you with exactitude is better. Exactitude of judgment. Okay, haroy lahem, which is proper for them, fitting for them. Kamosha bir yisale mitorav, as he explained in his attributes, okay, by saying erech hapayim v'rav chesed, slow to anger and abundant in kindness. That is Bamidbar. I'm not going to type the sources here. Okay. Amru, he said, erech hapayim latzadi. Sorry, they said. They said. So Chazal interpret that to mean slow to anger for the righteous and for the wicked. Okay, and that's a Gemara. Okay, and at some point, not today, we're gonna have to go into that Gemara. Okay, but that's Chazal's explanation of this statement, slow to anger. V'amar Hanavi, and the prophet said, B'ti'uro, of his attributes, Tov Hashem lakol, Hashem is good to all. Where's that from? Tov Hashem lakol.
Tehillim?
Yeah, which Tehillim?
Well, it says, but
Which Tehillim is Kuf Mem Hey?
Oh, Ashrei.
Ashrei, yeah, okay, right. So we should all know this from Ashrei, right? Okay, so already the Rambam was answering. Well, we'll go back and see the answers to his question, to our questions in a second. All right, v'achar kach, and afterwards he said, all right, actually, let's review now. Okay, let's just see which questions he's answered here. Okay, so first he introduces it, says this is worthy of Rabbi Akiva, and you got to read the Shemoneh Perakim. Then he says everything is known in the world before God. So this is what it means by tzafui. So it's seen by God. Okay, and he's saying that what is hakol? Hakol is everything in the world. Okay, meaning everything literally means everything that is in existence. Okay, then he doesn't answer this question because he says he answered it earlier, but he addresses this question. He says, if everything is foreseen, how can man have free will? So what's the answer? Is read the Shemoneh Perakim, but he's saying don't think that because everything is seen that man is compelled. Rather, man has absolute free will. Then he says, Hashem's judgment of mankind is with kindness, not with exactitude of judgment. So this is answering the question of what does it mean by the world is judged in goodness as opposed to what? So yeah, as opposed to being judged accurately, right? It's judged with chesed, not with exactitude. Okay, and he's saying that this is what do you call what the Navi means when it says that God is slow to anger and that Hashem is good for to all. Okay, so any questions on this so far? Because we're now going to get into the part that is feels different. Okay, let's go forward. And afterwards he said, and you might have heard this before, that good midos, okay, and we'll just say midos as character traits here, are not acquired al pi godel hamase, based on the enormity of the action. Ella beribui mispar hamasim, but on the multitude of the quantity of the actions. Okay. Actually, let's put it in terms of quality and quantity. Are not acquired based on the great quality of the action, but rather based on the magnitude multitude of the quantity of the actions. Okay, so that is what he means by aval lo lefi hamaseh. Okay, it's not based on, and this is also rov, is like literally the number. Okay, okay, so what does this mean? He elaborates. V'hu she'ein hamidos hatovos niknos. Okay, this is because good midos aren't acquired, or sorry, are only acquired. When man goes over good actions, or repeats good actions many times. And through this, man will attain a disposition for this. Okay, like you'll become predisposed to this. Lo kishiyase adam mase gadol, not when a person does gadol echad, one great action, mimase atov, out of the good actions. Kiba oso masa levado, because through that action alone, lo tikane lo tichune lekach, he will not acquire a disposition to this. Okay, so if that's confusing, Rambam's going to give two examples, or one example. Yeah, one example. Hamashal b'zeh. Okay, for example, im nasan, and this you might have heard before. Im nasan adon lamisha roy litain elef dinarim b'pam achas la'adam echad. If a person gave $1,000 in one shot to a person who was deserving of this, lo tikne lo midas hanadivos, he would not acquire the trait of generosity through this one great action. In the same way as a person would acquire it, through giving 1,000, through giving elef pa'amim be'elef dinarim v'nasan kol dinar mehen b'derech nadava. So I'm going to just paraphrase this. Through giving $1 in 1,000 acts of generosity. Okay. On 1,000 occasions. Lefi shazeh, because this latter person, chazar al pu'ulas hanadivos elef pa'amim, repeated the action of generosity many times, 1,000 times. The niknis lo tichuna chazaka, and thereby acquired a strong disposition. V'zeh pa'amachas bilvad, but this former person who did it once, nis'ora hanefesh ha'is'oras gedola l'maseh tov, his soul was aroused with a great arousal for a good action, but then that arousal ceased. Okay, so you get the idea that if you're going to do an action, the only way to get qualities, to get good midos, is to repeat the actions many times. And you could be doing the same result, which is giving $1,000 to tzedakah, but and mitzvah wise, halakhically, like, you know, you're still accomplishing the mitzvah of tzedakah, but in terms of developing the trait of generosity, you're not going to get the trait of generosity as much through one big action as you will through many, many repeated actions of generosity. Okay, last paragraph. V'chein b'Torah, likewise in Torah. Ein schar mi shepada shivui echad b'mea dinarim o nasan tzedakah la'ani mea dinarim shein de machzoro k'mi shepada asar shvuim u'milech machzor asar aniyim v'afilu basar dinarim. Okay, the reward of a person who redeemed one captive with $100 or gave $100 of tzedakah to one poor person who needed it is not the same, is not as great as someone who redeemed 10 captives or fulfilled the needs of 10 poor people, even at $10 a piece, $10 each. The al derech zo tadun. In the same, you should apply this similarly to other cases. V'zeh on inyan amro, and this is the meaning of his statement, according to the multitude of actions, but not according to the action. Okay, so just going back here. So what in your own words, what does he mean, not according to the action, or not based on the action? I think based on is better.
It seems that he's saying that it's just like what we just learned here, is that it's better to establish a pattern with your actions than to do one good action.
Right. So that was what I wanted to get at here, is he's saying the action, like with a definite article of the, he's saying the good action, right? Like the one big good action, right? And you should, like Brooke was saying, establish a pattern, right? So what does Masa mean in this context? Context is any action, mitzvah actions, or something else. What is he saying here? What types of actions are we talking about?
It seems tzedakah.
Well, tzedakah is his example, right?
You could apply that more generally, just like anything good, like
yes. Okay, good. So
anything good for yourself or for another person.
Yeah. So he says that we're talking. He says that he divides it into two cases: good midos, so actions that bring good midos, and then likewise in Torah, by which he means mitzvos. Okay, so any action that gives you good midos, whether it is a action mandated by halacha, like tzedakah and redeeming the captives, or whether it's just any good action, like petting a puppy or like, smiling to someone. Okay. So that is what Masa means. And then judgment, he doesn't say, right? He talks about God's judgment, that God judges the world in Chesed, but he hasn't really explained that. And he hasn't explained what this is doing in Pirkei Avos. Okay. So any questions on the Rambam here before we go into the last part of our fact gathering thing, which is the Rambam on free will?
I do have questions, but I kind of want to wait until we finish the whole thing to see if they're answered.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to advise you to ask them now, so that when we are reading the Rambam and Shemoneh Perakim, we can note the answers as we see them.
Okay. I mean, they might be more generalized questions that I'm just thinking of based off of the Rambam.
Sure, that's
but
fine.
Now I'm thinking, if we are judged with goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's the same question, but is that accurate? Is that correct, or a just way to be judged?
Okay, good. So let's add that question. Okay, which is like this. Let me actually make a separate list of questions on the Rambam. Okay, so the question is like this. Hold on. Got our font problem again. Okay. If, as the Rambam says, as the Rambam says, God does not judge people accurately, but instead judges them with chesed. How is that in line with justice? Right? We say that God is absolutely just. How can that be reconciled with judging people in a way where they don't get what they deserve? Right? It sounds like a violation of justice. To quote Avraham Avinu, Hashovet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat, will the judge of the entire earth not do justice? Yeah, great question. Okay, any other questions on the Rambam that came up? Okay, so what we're about to do is dangerous, which is we're going to go into the Rambam on free will and God's knowledge. Again, you could spend many shiurim on this, okay, but our job is to just to get the facts with an eye towards this mishnah, okay? So I'm totally fine if you ask questions, but I reserve the right to say, like, that's a separate shiur, that's a separate shiur, or we'll answer later on in the shiur. Okay, so here we go. This is in the 8th parak of the Shemoneh Perakim, and this is Yaakov Feldman's translation. Okay. So the Rambam begins by saying as follows. Let's get the right size. Okay. It is not possible for man to be born either inherently lofty or inherently flawed, just as it is impossible for him to be born instinctively adept at a trade, right? So you can't be born like knowing how to play piano, and you also can't be born like wise, or you can't be born kind, okay? But it is possible to be predisposed to a particular virtue or fault, and to find it easier to do certain things over others. So classic examples, like if you are like, I don't know, let's stereotype here. Okay, I'll stereotype myself, right? Let's say you're Asian, right? You might just be predisposed to be better at math, right? Or like, let's say you are, and this is both for good and bad news. So like, let's say you are the child of an alcoholic, so you are predisposed to develop alcoholism more so than a person who's not the child of an alcoholic. So it does not mean that Chinese kids are born knowing math, or that the children of alcoholics are born as alcoholics. It means that it's easier for them to become that. Okay, you see the distinction? Okay. So then he says, he gives examples. So for example, a person whose constitution, this is based on the, you guys know the theory of the 4 humors, not like the haha humors, but like the bodily fluids. That in the olden days, they thought that there were 4 fluids in the body. I don't know why they called them humors, that were blood, phlegm, red bile, yellow bile and black bile. And that the proportions of those humors resulted in different character traits. So for example, if you had excess black bile, then you would be predisposed to depression. Okay. And in fact, that's what we call the word melancholy, right? Means black bile. Okay. So the word still comes from that. Or if you had an excess, I think blood was also in there somewhere. If you have like an excess of blood, then you are predisposed to be happy, right? And that's why we say the word sanguine means happy. Is that true? Hold on, did I just make that up? Sanguine. Yeah, happy or positive, right? Or if you are, what do you call it? If you are have excess phlegm, then you're phlegmatic, which means you're slow or dull. Okay, so like in English, it preserved these things. So that's what the Rambam was talking about here. So for example, a person whose constitution tended towards dryness and whose brain matter was clear and barely moist by nature, and then Rabbi Feldman says, i.e. a cool, calm, and collected individual, as we might put it, would find it easier to remember and understand things than a more phlegmatic person would, whose brain matter is very moist. But if someone who was predisposed towards this virtue, i.e. towards remembering and understanding things easily, did not study at all and was not encouraged to do so, he would undoubtedly remain ignorant despite his native gifts. While if someone else with a duller, quite moist nature were taught and trained, he could learn and understand things despite his not having a knack for it, though it would admittedly be only with difficulty and effort. In the same fashion, someone who is inappropriately hot by nature, i.e. a hot-blooded individual, could be brave since he is predisposed to it, and he would easily become so if he were taught how, while someone overly cold by nature, who is thus predisposed to cowardice and fear, would easily become cowardly and fearful if he were trained in it and acted that way consistently. Yet if he were directed towards courage, he would could undoubtedly become brave, though with difficulty if he consistently did brave things. So let's just use modern analogies here, right? So take the Vilna Gaon, who they say was a genius from an early age, okay? And then the Netziv, who was one of the great, Achronim, he, if you read his the biography of my uncle, the Netziv, so the Netziv, one of the things that made him great was he was not talented, okay, in learning, I guess the Netziv is a good example, but he worked really, really, really hard at it. and he reached this high level as well. So neither the Netziv nor the Vilna Gaon were born with a mastery of Torah, but for the Vilna Gaon, it came easily, but the Netziv, it came difficult. It was harder, but you could acquire it, Or let's say you have someone who is athletic, but he never, ever trains. So athletic just means that he's predisposed to become an athlete if he puts the training in, but if he doesn't train, it's not going to work out, Okay, so any questions on that? That was section 1. Okay, so now he says, the only reason I explained this to you was to prevent you from accepting the inanities. What's the Hebrew word here? Like the fantasies, like the illusions that the astrologers hold to be true. For they imagine that a person's birth date determines whether he will be lofty or flawed, and that one is compelled to act accordingly, right? So this is horoscopes, right? If you believe that you're born under a certain star, then you have a certain character trait. It determines your character trait. That is insane, okay? And that's something that the Torah is against. It is important to know, however, that the Torah agrees with the Greek philosophy, which substantiates conclusively that man's actions are in his own hands. No one compels him to do anything, and nothing other than himself ever inclines him towards a character, virtue, or flaw, other than a predisposition, as we explained, would make him find a specific thing easier or harder to do. Nonetheless, it will never happen that one is compelled to or restrained from behaving one way or another. So we have absolute free will. The most you can have is a predisposition that certain actions will be easier or more difficult, but nothing compels you to do an action or inaction, or compels you to have a flaw or a virtue. Why must you say this? For if man was compelled to act the way he does, then all the Torah's imperatives and prohibitions would be in vain and utterly meaningless, since man would not be free to do as he wishes. Right? So this is the classic thing. How do we know that the Torah holds by free will? Because if you didn't have free will and God said, put up a mezuzah or don't eat pork, then that would be pointless, because if either if you didn't have free will, then you couldn't control those actions anyway. It'd be like giving commandments to a robot, right? The robot can't choose to disobey, so the Torah would be pointless. Furthermore, all study, education, and labor or craft-related training would be in vain too, since according to this theory of the astrologers, man would have something other than himself compelling him to do something in particular, to be familiar with a particular subject, or to exhibit a particular trait, right? So if I said, for example, like go to medical school to learn to become a doctor. So if the astrologers are right, then either you are destined to become a doctor or you're not. And telling you to go to medical school wouldn't have any impact because you don't control your actions. So or if I say like, be careful when you drive, drive safely. Well, if your fate is controlled by the stars, then me telling you to be careful is not going to do anything because you can't control it. Okay. Reward and punishment, whether societies or gods, would be utterly unfair. Societies means like human imposed punishments. For if a person, Shimon, killed another, Reuven, because he was forced to or compelled to kill, and his victim was forced or compelled to be killed, then why should the killer, Shimon, be punished? And how could it ever be said that God, who is just and fair, punished someone for doing something he was compelled to do and could not help but do, even if he did not want to? So this is like in last week's parsha in Mishpatim. Then you have the statement of about someone who kills unintentionally, and it was like set up by God. And you have people who say that like if you have a chazal that says like if let's say Shimon murdered somebody intentionally and deserves the death penalty, and Reuven murdered someone, was guilty of manslaughter and is deserving of exile, wait, is this the case? So then like God will arrange it so that like Reuven is climbing a ladder above Shimon and then stumbles and falls and then lands on Shimon and kills him. And then because he like got this manslaughter second crime, then like he has to go into exile. Like God will arrange it so that this happens. So Chazal say something like that, but Rambam saying you can't take that literally because God doesn't make you do averos or mitzvos because that would be unjust. Okay. Besides, any precaution we would take against homelessness, poverty, disease, etc., like building houses, procuring food, running away when frightened, and the like would be meaningless, since what was decreed simply had to be, right? So again, all human actions would be meaningless if you didn't have free will. Because why are you buying food from the grocery store in order to eat? Either you will starve or you won't. It's not in your hands. Okay, so that's like why you have to say free will. Okay. Oh, by the way, if anyone is interested in a 2-page short story on this topic of free will, then contact me via WhatsApp and I'll send it to you. Okay, so it's a really mind-twisting short story and it's only 2 pages. Okay. Okay, so he says, but that is nonsense, utterly meaningless, and runs counter to reason and emotion. And when he says emotion, I think he means experience. Okay, it goes against reason and experience, meaning we experience ourselves having free will. Okay, it tears down, i.e., it threatens to invalidate the wall of Torah, and it deems God unjust, heaven forfend. Okay, but the truth of the matter, beyond any doubt, is that all of man's actions are in his own hands. If he wants to do something, he can, and if he does not want to, he does not have to. There's no compulsion or force working upon him, and that is what establishes the authority of the mitzvos. Okay, so after all, behold, God has said, behold, I have placed before you today life and goodness, death and evil, therefore choose life, and thus placed the choice in our hands. And there is necessarily punishment for transgression and reward for obedience. As it says, you will receive blessings if you obey the mitzvos of God your Lord, and you will be cursed if you disobey. And there is an obligation to study and to teach, as it says, teaching them to your children and to learn them, to observe them, to do them. There's an obligation as well to do everything connected to studying and observing mitzvos. One is also obligated to take all the precautions against harm or damage enumerated in the Book of Truth, which says, make a guardrail for your roof, and ma'akeh, lest someone fall from there. Right. So in other words, when the Torah says, make a ma'akeh for your roof, lest someone fall, it's saying that human precautions pay off. That if you make a guardrail, you will prevent people from falling. And if you don't, then they might fall. Saying that like, oh, this person was destined to fall is completely ludicrous according to Torah, because if people who fall were destined to fall, then the mitzvah of ma'akeh would be in vain. Okay. Or another example, let him go back to his house for he may die in battle. That's when the Torah says people who are cowardly or who like just built a new house or just got married or made a new vineyard should retreat from war, because if they go to war, then that's going to affect their fighting. Let's say the cowardly one. If you're cowardly, you're going to make everyone else feel cowardly and you're going to lose the battle. So if winning the battle was destined to happen or not, so then God wouldn't have to announce and say, oh, people who are cowardly should go home. If you make your neighbor's garment as a security, bring it back to him by sundown, for that is his only covering. What would he then sleep with? And do not take lower or upper millstones as a pledge. And there are many other statements in the Torah and the book of the prophets on the subject, i.e. taking precautions. Okay. As to the sage's statement that everything is in the hands of heaven, but the fear of heaven, that too is correct. In fact, it even follows along with our explanation, as we'll soon see. Okay, you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm actually going to do something, make an executive decision. We didn't finish doing the facts, but I have a feeling that if we do this next part, it's going to take us about a half an hour. And today that's longer than I have. Okay, so I said we were going to try to finish the facts, but we didn't. Okay, so we have a little bit more facts to go over next time. And then our goal will be to try to make sense of the Mishnah. And the main, actually, let me just show you this. Here's the main question that I want to try to address in this entire shir, okay? What does this free will stuff have to do with God's judgment and the thing Rambam is saying about acquiring good middos? These seem like 3 completely separate topics that, yeah, God has knowledge of everything and free will is given, okay? Here, God judges the world with chesed. We have to understand what that means. And then if you want good middos, you should do actions repeatedly. What do those have to do with each other? What's the unity? Okay, that's going to be the ultimate mission for this Mishnah. Okay, so hopefully we will continue next week. And if you know anyone who wants to join next week, I advise them, I mean, we'll review it, but I advise them to listen to this year. So if you need me to send this to them, I can send you the recording. Okay, have a good Shabbos, everybody. And text me if you want that short story, okay? All right, talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good Shabbos.